I'm Gary Feldman.
I'm Tamsin Kaplan.
So we're Davis Malm. We're two of the lawyers in the employment group. Welcome to our presentation on some new developments in employment law.
Is an employer permitted to have policies governing personal relationships in the workplace? I was just talking to somebody down there about that earlier this morning. So can you tell your employees, you can't have a romantic or intimate relationship with your boss, or you can't work in the same department with someone from your family or your spouse? Is an employer permitted to have policy? An employer is. This is true, false. An employer is permitted to do this? True? Absolutely true. One of the issues, obviously, that arises in a workplace is potential liability from romantic relationships that arise, particularly if it's between somebody who's a supervisor and somebody who's a supervisee, or any situation where one person has decision-making authority over the other in some way, giving them assignments, giving them evaluations, determining their wages, directing them in some way in the workplace. And the reason that this can really cause damage is because it not only is a workplace morale issue, it also is, again, a liability issue. So say there's a relationship that arises in the workplace, and at some point it becomes non-consensual. That could give rise to a sexual harassment claim. Say there's a perception by other people in the workplace that this relationship is going on, and as a result, a coworker is being treated in a preferential way. There's favoritism because of this perceived relationship. That person can bring a claim. There was just a recent case in Massachusetts where a person felt that they were being treated less favorably because of an intimate relationship that was going on or perceived to be going on between a coworker and a manager. And in fact, they found that that was sexual harassment because it was conduct of a sexual nature that was unwelcome and negatively impacting this observer, this third party. So we want to be very careful. And of course, there's the morale issue too, which is it can cause a lot of negative feeling, it can cause discomfort, jealousies can arise, and there can be perceptions of favoritism or perceptions of retaliation, even if they don't exist. Yes?
So what if it's too late and they're already having a relationship? Do you have them sign something? What do you do?
Well, everybody has a different take on this, but in fact, in your materials, you will find something that we call a love contract. So let's move on to this, and then I'll go back a little bit. Thank you, Amy. An employer may require employees who are romantically involved to sign a contract affirming that the relationship is consensual, releasing the employer from liability, and indemnifying the employer. Can you do that? Crazy as it seems, yes. And I've got two different love contracts in your materials. One of them is more laid back, and it just states that we're doing this, we know that there may be some liability, and we understand that we have to behave ourselves, no public displays of affection, no favoritism, etc. And then there's another one that actually includes, hi Linda, there's another one that actually includes indemnification language, release language. Personally, I think that's completely over the top. But it depends on your workplace environment, your culture, what's appropriate, under your circumstances. Going back to the policies, you'll see different examples of policies in your materials. The important thing, in my opinion, is to convey to people what your expectations are as an employer. So should one of these relationships evolve in the workplace, or should it already exist in the workplace, I prefer a policy where we talk about how this can be problematic, both from morale and from a legal point of view, so that people understand that this can give rise to problems. And we also require that the supervisor in the relationship make the relationship known to their boss or to HR, so that the company has this information, it's talked about with the involved parties, and there can be an opportunity to address the situation. many times the best way to address the situation is to move one of the parties, if it's at all possible, for there to be a transfer, for there to be a relocation, so that you don't have a situation where two people are involved in a romantic relationship where, again, one has some decision-making authority relative to the terms and conditions of the other one's employment.
I would add that presents a very difficult pathway for the employer. It's fraught with difficulty to end up, because likely scenario, the person who's in the superior or senior position, whether it's the male or the woman, say it's an executive, the company's not going to want to move the executive, and so then the company's going to look to the subordinate, and it's going to look to, and then it just opens claims of, gender and power and issues. So it's not an easy road. It's not an easy path to assume that you can resolve the situation by we'll just separate the two.
And let's face it. I mean, the reality in our world is that usually the supervisor, the higher level person, is the man. The lower level person is the woman. And so we have to be very careful because, again, as Gary says, it's easy to move the lower level person, say, it's an admin or somebody whose position is more flexible, transfers are available, and then there can be an allegation of gender discrimination.
If there hasn't been a complaint and there's just a rumor, how far do I have to go to either prove or disprove?
You don't have to engage in this at all. This is really completely discretionary as far as what makes sense in your workplace.
Unless you have a policy. So I've talked with a lot of employers. When I review this issue, they say, you know what? I don't want to have a policy. I often recommend you should have a policy that would prohibit any personal, sexual, intimate relationship between anyone in a supervisory chain of command. And a lot of employers, clients will say, you know what? I don't want to have that written, because then if you have a written policy and then word comes to your attention that Steve and Amy are in an intimate relationship, then you have to do something. And then what do you do about it? So some employers, and I think legitimately, because it is a very difficult area, say, you know what, we'll deal with it on a case-by-case basis. I don't want to have a policy in writing that's then going to require me as the employer to do something that I may not want to do and no one may want to do, and there may not be any complaints from anyone else. You run the risk, though, that someone down the line, someone's going to complain that Sue got better treatment, got a better raise and a better assignment and better customer list than I did because she's sleeping with the boss, kind of a thing.
So very, very careful. And again, it is completely discretionary. But I can't underscore Gary's point enough that if there is a policy, you must enforce that policy. And that's true for any policy that you have in your handbook or otherwise. You should have policies that you are comfortable and able to enforce consistently across the board all the time.
So what if they're peers, they get romantically involved, we have them sign one of these little letters, and the relationship falls apart and one party starts claiming sexual harassment against the other one? What does the employer have to do at that point?
Well, if you want to take the most extreme approach, which is to have them sign this contract that says, we release all legal claims and blah, 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 the fact is, it may be communicating to these employees that they've released all legal claims, but the law is that you cannot release legal claims that may occur in the future. You can only release any potential legal claim that has arisen up to the time that you sign that release. And so you are still vulnerable to a potential sexual harassment claim. And if it's against a supervisor or manager, you're automatically on the hook. If it's between peers, you're on the hook if you knew or should have known about the sexual harassment. So, it is dangerous to have relationships in the workplace. Do they occur all the time? Do they lead to liability? In most cases, no. But there are certain workplace cultures where you really want to take this very seriously. And just to this point of enforcing what policies you choose to have in place, I had a situation with one of my clients where we had a sales manager who was traveling with a salesperson, and they were both married, but they were having affairs. They always booked 2 rooms, but they always used 1 room, we found out a long time later. Well, turns out we have a policy in the employee handbook that specifically says that the person, I didn't write this particular policy, but it's in the handbook, the person in the higher level position has this requirement to let management know, to let the company know of the existence of this relationship. Obviously, this guy did not do that. Turns out this guy is a shareholder, a C-level executive. Nobody wants to let him go. They want to somehow get rid of the woman, right? Very difficult. But they had no choice but to discipline him purely because he violated their policy. He did something that was against policy, and then he didn't report, which was required by policy. And so they found themselves in a very, very difficult position.
This is the way these things come down. Any other questions on this?
Just quick, you say employees, what about if you have contractors?
Well, as you know, you're required to protect your employees from vendors, contractors, third parties, customers with whom they interact as part of their work. And so potentially you could have the same issues